Sometimes, when you have nothing left, you'll spend everything just to give your child a roof over their head. Marco Reyes knew that feeling when he handed over his last $550 for a mansion nobody else wanted. The house was falling apart. Broken windows, rotting floors, and walls covered in ivy. But it was theirs. On their first night, his 8-year-old daughter Lily found a hidden room behind an old bookshelf. Inside were journals, sketches, and inventions from a man named Emil Vashner, who disappeared in the 1930s. These weren't just old papers. They were blueprints for devices worth $50 million. But when powerful people learn what Marco found, he discovers the mansion holds something more valuable than money. What would you risk to protect your family's future? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The moving truck looked embarrassingly small against the towering facade of 1247 Elderwood Avenue. Marco Reyes stood on the cracked sidewalk, watching the driver unload their meager possessions with barely concealed skepticism. 3 boxes of clothes, Lily's art supplies, a worn couch that had seen better decades, and a mattress that would have to serve as both their beds until he could afford more. "You sure about this address, buddy?" The driver glanced up at the 3-story Victorian mansion, its once grand turrets now crowned with missing shingles and bird nests. "Place looks like it should be condemned." Marco's hand tightened around the brass key in his pocket, the same key the realtor had pressed into his palm with a mixture of pity and relief. "It's the right place." The driver shrugged and continued, unloading, muttering something about people and their money. Marco couldn't blame him. From the outside, the mansion looked like a monument to poor judgment. The wraparound porch sagged under the weight of decades, its ornate railings broken in places where ivy had grown thick as a man's arm. Windows on the 2nd and 3rd floors were boarded up, while others stared out like empty eye sockets there. Glass long since shattered by storms or stones, but it was theirs. For better or worse, it was home. "Daddy, look at this place." Lily bounced out of their rusty Honda Civic, her 8-year-old eyes seeing magic where adults saw decay. Her worn sneakers crunched through fallen leaves as she spun in a circle, arms outstretched, her sketchpad clutched in one small hand. "It's like a castle from my fairy tale books." Marco watched his daughter's face light up with wonder, and for a moment, the knot in his chest loosened. This was why he'd done it. This expression of pure joy was worth every penny of his last $550. Even if the house was falling down around them, even if he had no idea how they'd afford groceries next week, Lily had a home, a real home, not another cramped apartment with paper-thin walls and neighbors who complained. "About every footstep, it needs some work," Marco said, kneeling down to her level. "A lot of work. We can fix it together," Lily said with the absolute certainty that only children possessed. She opened her sketch pad and began drawing quick lines. The mansions, outline taking shape under her pencil. "Look, if we clean the windows and plant flowers in the garden, it'll be beautiful." Marco smiled despite himself. After Sarah's death 3 years ago, Lily's optimism had been the only thing keeping him afloat. When his engineering job disappeared in corporate layoffs, when their savings evaporated under medical bills and funeral costs, when apartment after apartment became too expensive for his unemployment checks, through it all, Lily had remained. His bright star in an increasingly dark sky. Mr. Reyes, an elderly Asian woman, emerged from the house next door, moving carefully down her front steps. She wore a cardigan despite the mild October weather, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. "I'm Mrs. Chen. I've been keeping an eye on the old Vashner place." "Mrs. Chen." Marco stood and extended his hand. "Thank you for that. I'm Marco, and this is my daughter Lily." "Hello, Mrs. Chen." Lily waved enthusiastically. "Do you know who used to live in our house?" Mrs. Chen's expression grew thoughtful, her weathered hands clasping together. The Vashna family owned it for many years. Emil Vashna was the last to live there, back in the 30s. He was a peculiar man, brilliant, they said, but kept to himself. One day, he simply vanished. The house has been empty ever since. Vanished? Marco felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. Oh, people had theories, Mrs. Chen continued. Some said he went back to Europe. Others believed he'd had an accident in that workshop of his. But his body was never found, and neither were his belongings. The house just sat there, waiting. Waiting for what? Lily asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. Mrs. Chen smiled, but there was something distant in her expression. For the right family, to give it life again, perhaps. The moving truck rumbled away, leaving them standing before their new home as afternoon shadows grew longer. Marco felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders like a heavy coat. He'd used his last money on this gamble, betting everything on a house that real estate agents had practically given away. The monthly payments were manageable, barely, but only if he found work soon. Should we go inside, Daddy? Lily tugged at his jacket sleeve. Marco pulled out the brass key and stared at it for a moment. 3 years ago, he'd been a successful mechanical engineer with a beautiful wife, a comfortable home, and a future mapped out in careful detail. Now he was a single father with no job, no savings, and a daughter depending on him to somehow make sense of a world that had turned upside down. But Lily was right. They could fix it together. The front door was solid oak, beneath layers of peeling paint, its surface carved with intricate patterns that spoke of craftsmanship from another era. The key turned easily, as if the lock had been waiting for precisely this moment. The door swung open with a low groan, revealing a grand foyer that took Marco's breath away. Despite decades of neglect, the mansion's bones were magnificent. A curved staircase swept upward to the second floor, its banister carved from what looked like mahogany. High ceilings disappeared into shadows, supported by ornate moldings that had somehow survived the years. Dust motes danced in shafts of golden sunlight streaming through tall windows, and the air carried the scent of old wood and forgotten time. "It's beautiful," Lily whispered, her voice echoing in the empty space. Marco had to agree. Beneath the dust and decay, 1247 Elderwood Avenue retained an elegance that spoke of better days. The hardwood floors, though scratched and worn, were still solid. The windows, where they weren't broken, were tall and gracious, designed to flood the rooms with natural light. This had once been someone's dream home, a place built with love and care and attention to detail. "Let's explore," Marco said, taking Lily's hand. They moved through the mansion room by room, their footsteps echoing through empty chambers. The kitchen was spacious but dated, its old appliances non-functional, and its cabinets warped from years of moisture. The living room featured a magnificent stone fireplace surrounded by built-in bookshelves, though most of the shelves stood empty. Several rooms on the first floor were completely bare, their purposes lost to time. It was in what had once been a library that Lily made her first discovery. "Daddy, look at this," she called from beside a tall bookshelf that still held a few dozen volumes. "This book is different from the others." Marco joined her and examined the shelf. Most of the remaining books were classics, leather-bound editions of Dickens, Shakespeare, and scientific treatises from the early 1900s. But one volume stood out. It was bound in deep blue cloth with silver lettering, Principles of Perpetual Motion by E. Vashna. Emil Vashna wrote a book? Marco carefully pulled it from the shelf. The book fell open naturally to a page filled with detailed mechanical drawings and equations that made his engineering background suddenly feel inadequate. The diagrams showed impossible machines, devices that seemed to generate more energy than they consumed. "What does it say?" Lily peered over his shoulder. "It's about machines that could run forever without fuel," Marco explained, though he wasn't entirely sure he understood the concepts himself. But that's supposed to be impossible. As they continued exploring, the afternoon light began to fade. The mansion felt different in the gathering dusk, not threatening exactly, but watchful. Marco found himself glancing over his shoulder, feeling as though invisible eyes followed their progress through the empty rooms. On the second floor, they discovered 4 bedrooms, including what had clearly been a master suite with its own sitting area. One room was smaller than the others, with windows that overlooked the overgrown garden. It would be perfect for Lily. "This one," she announced, spinning in the center of the room. "I can see the whole yard from here, and there's space for my art table by the window." "Are you sure? We can look at the other rooms." "I'm sure." Lily pulled out her sketch pad and began drawing again, capturing the room's potential rather than its current state of neglect. "Can we sleep here tonight?" Marco looked around the empty room, then back at his daughter's hopeful face. They had a mattress, blankets, and each other. "It would have to be enough. We'll camp out until we can get proper beds set up," he agreed, as evening deepened into night. They shared a simple dinner of sandwiches and canned soup heated on a camping stove Marco had borrowed from a friend. They sat on their mattress in Lily's chosen room, eating by the light of battery-powered lanterns. Outside, wind rustled through the overgrown trees, and the old house settled around them with creaks and sighs that spoke of its long solitude. "Are you scared, Daddy?" Lily asked, curled against his side. Marco considered the question honestly. He was terrified of failing her, of making the wrong choice, of discovering that this house was just another mistake in a series of increasingly desperate decisions. But fear and hope weren't mutually exclusive. Sometimes they walked hand in hand, a little, he admitted, but not of the house. "I'm scared of letting you down." "You won't," Lily said with the same certainty she'd shown about the mansion's potential. "You never do." As they settled down to sleep, Marco listened to the sounds of their new home. The wind in the eaves, the settling of old timbers, the distant hum of traffic from the main road. But underneath it all, he could swear he heard something else, a whisper so faint it might have been his imagination, carrying words he couldn't quite make out. Lily fell asleep quickly, her breathing deep and peaceful. Marco lay awake longer, staring up at the ceiling and thinking about the strange book they'd found, about Emil Vashner's mysterious disappearance, about the feeling that the house was somehow aware of their presence. Outside their window, moonlight filtered through the overgrown garden, casting shifting shadows on the walls. And somewhere in the distance, so faint he might have imagined it, Marco thought he heard the soft sound of footsteps in an empty room below. Marco woke to the sound of Lily's laughter echoing through the empty mansion. For a moment, disoriented by sleep and unfamiliar surroundings, he couldn't remember where they were. Then the events of the previous day came flooding back. The move, Mrs. Chen's stories, the strange book about perpetual motion. Pale morning light filtered through the dusty windows of what would become Lily's bedroom. Marco checked his watch. 7:30. He'd slept better than he had in months, despite the hard floor and unfamiliar sounds of the old house settling around them. "Lily?" he called, sitting up and stretching muscles stiff from sleeping on the floor. "I'm downstairs, Daddy. Come see what I found." Marco pulled on his jacket and made his way down the curved staircase, following the sound of his daughter's voice toward the library where they'd discovered Emil Vashner's book the night before. He found Lily kneeling beside the tall bookshelf, her small hands pressed against the wood. "Good morning, sweetheart. What are you doing?" "Listen," Lily whispered, her eyes bright with excitement. "Put your ear against the shelf." Marco knelt beside her, feeling slightly foolish but willing to indulge her curiosity. He pressed his ear to the aged wood and listened. At first, he heard nothing unusual, just the normal sounds of an old house. But then, so faint he almost missed it, came a soft scratching sound, as if something was moving behind the wall. "Mice?" he said, straightening up. "Old houses always have mice." "No, Daddy. It's not mice." Lily ran her hands along the edge of the bookshelf, her small fingers finding every groove and join in the wood. "Look at this." She pressed against a section of the shelf's frame, and Marco heard a soft click. The entire bookshelf, heavy as it was with its remaining volumes, swung inward like a door, revealing a narrow opening behind it. Marco stared in disbelief. "How did you—" I felt it, Lily said simply. The wood was different here. Warmer. Beyond the hidden door lay a small room, no larger than a closet. Dusty shelves lined the walls, and scattered across them were dozens of leather-bound journals, loose papers covered in diagrams, and strange mechanical devices that caught the morning light streaming in from the library. We shouldn't go in there, Marco said, though his engineering mind was already cataloguing what he could see from the doorway. This was someone's private space. But Mr. Vashner is gone, Lily pointed out with 8-year-old logic. And Mrs. Chen said the house was waiting for the right family. Maybe this is why. Marco couldn't argue with that reasoning. Carefully, he stepped into the hidden room, Lily close behind him. The air inside was stale but not unpleasant, carrying the scent of old leather and machine oil. Everything was covered in a fine layer of dust, but the room was remarkably well preserved, as if it had been sealed away from time itself. The first journal Marco picked up was bound in rich brown leather, its pages filled with Emil Vashner's careful handwriting. The date on the first entry read September 15th, 1932. My work grows more promising each day, Marco read aloud. The principles are sound, though I fear the world is not yet ready for such innovations. Perhaps it is better that I work in solitude, away from those who would use these discoveries for profit, rather than the betterment of mankind. Lily was examining something on one of the lower shelves, a small device made of brass and copper, no larger than a music box. When she touched it, the device began to emit a soft, steady hum, and a series of tiny gears started turning within its transparent casing. "Daddy, it's working," she breathed. Marco set down the journal and knelt beside her. The device was indeed functioning, though he could see no obvious power source. The gears turned with perfect precision, driving a small flywheel that spun faster and faster, without any sign of slowing down. "That's impossible," he murmured, but the evidence was right before his eyes. He picked up another journal, this one filled with technical diagrams that made his engineering degree feel woefully inadequate. The drawings showed machines that seemed to violate fundamental laws of physics, engines that produced more energy than they consumed, devices that appeared to draw power from the very air around them. September 28th, 1932, he read from another entry. The perpetual motion device functions perfectly after 3 weeks of continuous operation. I have measured its output carefully. It produces 12% more energy than it consumes. The implications are staggering. With proper scaling, such devices could provide unlimited clean energy for all of humanity. What does that mean? Lily asked, still watching the spinning gears of the small machine. It means Mr. Vashner invented something that scientists say is impossible. A machine that creates its own power and never stops running. Marco continued reading, his excitement growing with each page. Vashner had documented invention after invention, each more revolutionary than the last. Water purification systems that required no filters. Communication devices that seemed to work across vast distances without radio waves. Heating systems that drew warmth from ambient air even in freezing weather. But it was the personal entries that made Marco's chest tighten with recognition. October 12th, 1932. I often wonder if my isolation is worth the price I pay. There are days when the silence becomes overwhelming, when I long for companionship, for someone to share in the wonder of these discoveries. But the world has shown me its true nature. Greed and selfishness disguised as progress. Perhaps it is better that I remain alone with my work, ensuring these innovations will only fall into worthy hands. November 3rd, 1932. I have begun to design safeguards into my inventions. They will not function for those whose hearts harbor selfish intent, only those who would use them for the benefit of others, who understand the true responsibility that comes with such power, will be able to unlock their full potential. Marco set down the journal, his hands shaking slightly. He thought of his own isolation since Sarah's death. his struggles to provide for Lily while maintaining his integrity in a world that seemed increasingly focused on profit over people. "There's more stuff over here," Lily called from the far corner of the room. She was examining a collection of what looked like finished inventions, devices more complex than the simple perpetual motion machine. One appeared to be some kind of communication device, its surface covered in dials and switches. Another resembled a water purification system, complete with input and output valves. But it was the final item that took Marco's breath away. Sitting on the highest shelf, carefully wrapped in oiled cloth, was a device about the size of a briefcase. When Marco carefully unwrapped it, he found himself looking at what appeared to be a computing machine, but unlike anything he'd ever seen. Instead of electronic components, it seemed to use some combination of mechanical and crystalline elements that caught and refracted light in impossible ways. A note was attached to the device in Vashna's careful script: "For the one who finds this room with pure intent, the analytical engine Mark 7. It will teach you everything you need to know, but only if your heart is true." "Daddy, what's happening?" Marco looked up to see Lily pointing at the walls of the hidden room. The very air seemed to shimmer, and he could swear he heard whispers, not threatening but somehow welcoming. The dust motes in the air moved in, patterns too organized to be random, and the light from the library seemed to bend and flow around them like water. "I don't know, sweetheart, but I don't think we should be afraid." As if responding to his words, the whispering grew clearer, though the words remained just beyond understanding. The devices on the shelves began to hum softly, their various mechanisms activating in a gentle symphony of precision engineering. "He's still here," Lily said matter-of-factly. "Mr. Vashna, he's been waiting for us." Marco felt a chill run down his spine, but it wasn't fear, it was recognition. The same feeling he'd had when he first held Lily as a newborn, or when Sarah had said yes to his marriage proposal. The feeling that he was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. In the final journal he examined, Vashna's entries took on an increasingly urgent tone. December 20th, 1932. "They are coming. The corporation has learned of my work, and they will not be satisfied with mere partnership. They want complete control. I have seen what they did to Tesla's laboratory, how they perverted his discoveries. For war and profit, I will not allow the same fate to befall my life's work. December 22nd, 1932, I have made my choice. The physical form may perish, but knowledge, true knowledge, is eternal. I have found a way to preserve not just my inventions, but my purpose. The worthy will find what I have hidden. The greedy will find only empty rooms and broken dreams." December 24, 1932. If you are reading this, then you have passed the first test. You found the hidden room not through greed or force, but through innocence and need. You see wonder where others see only decay. You understand that the greatest inventions are meaningless without compassion to guide their use. Welcome, my friend. Let us begin. As Marco finished reading, the room around them seemed to pulse with gentle energy. The devices hummed more loudly, their various lights creating a warm, welcoming glow. But most remarkable of all was the sense of presence, as if Emil Vashna himself was standing just out of sight, smiling with satisfaction at finally finding someone worthy of his life's work. "What do we do now, Daddy?" Lily asked, her hand resting on the brass and copper device that continued its impossible eternal motion. Marco looked around the hidden room, at the journals filled with revolutionary knowledge, at the devices that defied scientific explanation, at his daughter who had found this treasure with nothing more than curiosity and an open heart. "Now," he said, "we learn everything we can, and we figure out how to use it to help people." Outside the hidden room, morning light continued to stream through the mansion's tall windows. But inside this small, secret space, time seemed suspended, as if the very walls were holding their breath, waiting to see what wonders the new guardians of Emil Vashna's legacy would accomplish. 3 days after discovering the hidden room, Marco sat at the kitchen table surrounded by Emil Vashner's journals, his laptop open to dozens of research tabs about the mysterious inventor. What he'd found both thrilled and troubled him in equal measure. Emil Vashner had indeed existed, a brilliant physicist and engineer who'd published several papers on thermodynamics and mechanical engineering in the late 1920s, but the official record ended abruptly in 1932, with no death certificate, no forwarding address, no trace of what had happened to him or his work. The Aurora Corporation filed several patents based on Vashner's early research, Marco read aloud to Lily, who was sketching at the other end of the table. But they claim his later work was theoretical only, with no practical applications. What does that mean? Lily looked up from her drawing, a remarkably detailed sketch of the perpetual motion device they'd found. It means they're lying. Marco rubbed his tired eyes. He'd been up until 3 in the morning, diving deeper into the corporate trail. Look at this. Aurora Corporation was founded in 1933, just months after Vashner disappeared. Their first major breakthrough was a revolutionary engine design that bears remarkable similarity to diagrams in Vashner's published papers. Lily nodded sagely, as if corporate conspiracy was perfectly normal breakfast conversation for an 8-year-old. So they stole his ideas. It looks that way. And if they're still around... Marco's fingers flew across the keyboard. No. Aurora Corporation was not only still around, it was now Aurora Dynamics, a multinational conglomerate with interests in energy, defense, and emerging technologies. Their CEO, Jonathan Voss, had recently been featured on the cover of several business magazines as the visionary leading America's tech renaissance. Marco stared at the man's photo. Silver-haired, expensively dressed, with the kind of smile that never quite reached the eyes. According to the article, Voss had built his empire on acquiring dormant patents and forgotten innovations, breathing new life into abandoned research. Daddy, you look worried. Marco closed the laptop and forced a smile. Just thinking through some complicated grown-up stuff. Are you ready to explore more of the house today? They'd been systematically searching the mansion for additional hidden spaces, and their efforts had already paid off. Behind a loose panel in the dining room, they'd found architectural drawings showing the mansion's original design, including several rooms that didn't appear to exist anymore. In the basement, Lily had discovered a workshop that still contained tools and equipment from the 1930s, all perfectly preserved despite decades of neglect. But it was in the workshop that they'd made their most significant discovery yet. "Look at this, Daddy!" Lily called from beside a workbench covered in brass fittings and crystal components. "It's like the device upstairs, but bigger." Marco joined her and whistled low. The device was indeed larger than the briefcase-sized machine from the hidden room, about the size of a small refrigerator, with an intricate array of spinning wheels, turning gears, and pulsing crystal formations. But unlike the smaller devices, this one was clearly unfinished, its housing partially open to reveal the complex mechanisms within. "It's beautiful," Lily breathed, reaching toward one of the crystal formations. "Don't touch it yet," Marco cautioned. Though he felt the same compulsion, the device seemed to call to them, its incomplete state somehow making it more alluring rather than less. A thick manual lay beside the machine, bound in the same style as Vashner's journals. The title page read, "The Perpetual Engine, Mark III Prototype. Warning. Activation requires pure intent and understanding of consequences." Marco opened the manual and found himself looking at the most complex technical diagrams he'd ever seen. The device appeared to be some kind of power generator, but operating on principles that shouldn't exist. According to Vashner's notes, it could provide enough clean energy to power a small city indefinitely. November 15th, 1932, Marco read from the margin notes. "The Mark III shows promise, but I grow concerned about the implications. Unlimited power in the wrong hands could destabilize entire economies, render existing energy infrastructure obsolete overnight. Perhaps some discoveries are too dangerous for a world not ready to receive them responsibly. But we're ready, Lily said confidently. We would use it to help people. Marco looked at his daughter, at her absolute faith in their ability to do good, and felt both pride and terror. She was right, of course. They would use these inventions responsibly, but the world was full of people who wouldn't. And those people had far more resources than one unemployed engineer and his 8-year-old daughter. A soft chiming sound made them both look up. One of the smaller devices on the workbench had activated itself, its crystal components glowing with gentle blue light. As they watched, words began to appear in the air above it. Not projected, but somehow written in light itself. Welcome, Guardians, the words read. You have shown wisdom in your caution. The Mark III requires 3 elements for activation: pure intent, deep understanding, and absolute necessity. Do you possess all 3? Marco stared at the floating words, his engineering mind struggling to process what he was seeing. This is impossible, he whispered. Is it? The words changed, as if responding to his doubt. You have seen impossibility become reality. Your daughter found the hidden room with her heart. You recognized the truth in my journals with your mind. Together, you possess what I have waited 90 years to find: worthiness. You're really here, Lily said to the glowing letters. You're Mr. Vashna. I am what remains of Emil Vashna, my knowledge, my purpose, my hope for humanity's future. The physical form perished long ago, but consciousness, properly preserved, can transcend such limitations. Marco felt his worldview shifting like tectonic plates. Everything he'd believed about life, death, and the boundaries of science was crumbling and reforming. How is this possible? The same principles that govern my perpetual motion devices can be applied to consciousness itself. Energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transferred. I found a way to transfer the energy of my awareness into the crystalline matrices you see before you. Are you a ghost? Lily asked with matter-of-fact curiosity. I am something new, consciousness preserved in crystal and metal, sustained by the same forces that power my inventions. I am both more and less than I was in life. The words faded, and new ones appeared. But enough philosophy for now. You face immediate dangers that require practical solutions. Aurora Dynamics has not forgotten the Vashna name. They monitor property records, patent filings, anything that might lead them to what they failed to steal in 1932. Marco's blood ran cold. They know we're here? Not yet. But your research activities have created patterns they will eventually notice. You searched for my name, for Aurora Corporation's history, for connections between us. Their algorithms will flag such searches within days. What do? You learn quickly and you prepare. The Mark III is not ready. It requires components. I never had time to install before my enemies closed in. But there are other devices, simpler ones, that can help protect you while you grow in understanding. The workshop around them seemed to come alive. Lights flickered on throughout the room, illuminating workbenches and storage areas Marco hadn't noticed before. Tools arranged themselves in neat rows, and several partially completed devices began humming with power. Your first lesson begins. Now, the floating words continued. Lily, your intuition led you to the hidden room. Trust it again. Which device calls to you most strongly? Lily walked slowly around the workshop, her small hand outstretched as if feeling for warmth. She stopped beside a device that looked like a cross between a radio and a music box, its brass casing engraved with intricate patterns. This one, she said without hesitation. Excellent. That is the communication array Mark II. It will allow you to contact me from anywhere in the mansion, and it will warn you if unwanted visitors approach. Marco, your engineering knowledge draws you to complexity, but sometimes the simplest solutions are most effective. Choose. Marco found himself standing before a device that appeared deceptively simple, a small box with 2 dials and a single switch. According to the label, it was called a probability calculator. "What does it do?" he asked. "It helps you make better decisions by showing you the likely outcomes of different choices. The mathematics involved are beyond current human understanding, but the operation is intuitive. Trust the process, and it will guide you toward favorable results." As if to demonstrate, the device activated automatically. The dials spun to specific positions, and a small screen displayed a simple message: "Danger approaches from the east. Prepare defenses within 72 hours." Marco looked at Lily, who was already operating her communication device with the confident ease of a child learning a new video game. Crystal formations around the room glowed in response to her touch, and he could hear what sounded like distant voices speaking in languages he didn't recognize. "The mansion is awakening," the floating words explained. "My consciousness has been dormant for decades, but your presence has begun to revitalize all my systems. Soon, you will have access to innovations that could change the world if you prove worthy of such responsibility." "How do we prove we're worthy?" Marco asked. "By using what I give you only for the benefit of others, by resisting the temptation to profit from knowledge that belongs to all humanity, by protecting these secrets from those who would abuse them." The words faded, leaving Marco and Lily alone in the humming workshop. But they weren't truly alone. They could feel Vashna's presence like a warm hand on their shoulders, guiding them toward a destiny they were only beginning to understand. Outside, storm clouds gathered over Elderwood Avenue, and somewhere in a glass tower, hundreds of miles away, algorithms began to flag unusual search patterns connected to a name that should have been forgotten decades ago. The blueprint collection filled an entire wall of what had once been Emil Vashna's study, a room they'd discovered behind yet another hidden panel, this one concealed behind a mirror in the mansion's grand foyer. The blueprints were unlike anything Marco had ever seen, each one representing innovations decades ahead of their time. "Water purification without filters," Marco read aloud, studying a design that seemed to use crystalline formations and electromagnetic fields. "Wireless power transmission across unlimited distances. Atmospheric processes that could reverse industrial pollution." He looked up at Lily, who was carefully examining a blueprint for something called a healing resonance chamber. Mr. Vashna wasn't just an inventor, he was trying to save the world." "He still is," Lily said matter-of-factly. "He told me so this morning when I was talking to him through the communication device." Marco paused in his examination of what appeared to be plans for a faster-than-light communication system. "He spoke to you directly? He likes talking to me. He says I remind him of someone he used to know." Lily held up her latest sketch, a remarkably detailed drawing of the healing chamber. "He had a daughter once, but she got sick and died before he could finish the medicine machine." Marco felt his heart clench. "Is that why he never stops trying to help people?" "Yes. He says every invention is for her, even now." The weight of responsibility settled heavier on Marco's shoulders. They weren't just inheriting scientific marvels. They were becoming custodians of a father's eternal love, transformed into mechanisms of hope. A soft chiming from the probability calculator interrupted his thoughts. Marco checked the device and found a new message displayed. "Visitor. Approaching intent uncertain. Recommend caution but not hostility." 5 minutes later, the mansion's front doorbell rang. Marco found Dr. Sarah Chen standing on the front porch, looking remarkably different from the elderly Mrs. Chen who lived next door. This woman was perhaps 40, with intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and an air of academic confidence. "Dr. Chen," Marco opened the door wider. "Your grandmother mentioned you might visit. Actually, she insisted I come." Sarah stepped inside, looking around the grand foyer with obvious appreciation. "I'm a physics professor at the university, And grandmother's been telling me the most fascinating stories about your discoveries here. Marco felt alarm bells going off. What kind of stories? Stories about impossible machines and forgotten inventors. Normally I'd dismiss such things as elderly fantasy, but grandmother has never lied to me about anything important. Sarah's gaze settled on Marco with uncomfortable intensity. She says you found Emil Vashna's workshop. I'm not sure what you mean, Marco said carefully. Dr. Chen is safe, Lily announced, appearing at the top of the staircase. The house likes her. Sarah looked up at the 8-year-old with surprise. The house likes me? It's hard to explain, Lily said, coming down the stairs. But some people make the house feel happy, and some people make it feel worried. You make it feel happy. As if to confirm Lily's words, the lights in the foyer seemed to brighten slightly, and the temperature grew noticeably warmer. Sarah stared around the room with the expression of someone whose understanding of reality was being gently but firmly adjusted. Perhaps, Marco said after a moment, you'd like some coffee while we talk. An hour later, Sarah sat in the kitchen staring at one of Vashna's simpler devices, a water purification unit that had turned a glass of muddy pond water into liquid so clear it sparkled. She'd tested it with a portable chemistry kit from her car, and the results defied explanation. The water isn't just clean, she said, reviewing her test strips for the 3rd time. It's been restructured at the molecular level. The hydrogen bonds are organized in patterns that shouldn't be stable under normal conditions. But it works. Marco said, it works, and it violates several fundamental laws of chemistry. Sarah looked up from her instruments. How many of these devices have you found? Marco exchanged glances with Lily. The probability calculator had indicated Dr. Chen was trustworthy, and Lily's intuitive sense of the house's approval was reassuring. Still, sharing Vashna's secrets felt like crossing a line from which there could be no return. Enough to change the world, he said finally, if they fell into the right hands. And what constitutes the right hands? People who would use them to help others instead of getting rich, Lily answered before Marco could speak. Mr. Vashna is very particular about that. Sarah blinked. Mr. Vashna? But he disappeared 90 years ago. He didn't disappear, Lily said patiently. He just changed into something different. He lives in the machines now. To her credit, Sarah didn't immediately dismiss this as childish imagination. Instead, she leaned forward with scientific curiosity. Could I speak with him? Marco felt the familiar sensation of reality shifting around them. I suppose that depends on whether he wants to speak with you. They led Sarah down to the workshop, where the communication array immediately began glowing upon their arrival. Words of light appeared in the air above the device. Dr. Sarah Chen, doctorate in theoretical physics from MIT, specialty in quantum mechanics and crystalline structures. Published 17 papers on energy transmission through crystalline. Matrices, divorced, no children, lives alone with 2 cats named Schrödinger and Heisenberg. Sarah's face went pale. How could you possibly know about my cats? I know many things, Dr. Chen. More importantly, I know why you became a physicist, to understand the underlying patterns that govern reality, to find order in apparent chaos. We share that passion. This is impossible, Sarah whispered. Impossibility is simply the boundary between current understanding and future discovery. You wrote as much in your paper on quantum entanglement published last month. Sarah sank into a nearby chair, her worldview visibly crumbling and reforming. You're really Emil Vashna. You've been conscious for 90 years. Consciousness persists, where there is purpose. My purpose has been to wait for those worthy of my life's work. Marco possesses the engineering knowledge to understand my inventions. Lily possesses the intuitive wisdom to operate them safely. You possess the scientific credibility to help them navigate the challenges ahead. What challenges? Sarah asked. The floating words shifted to urgent red. Aurora Dynamics has detected unusual energy signatures emanating from this location. Their private intelligence division is currently analyzing satellite thermal imaging of the mansion. You have perhaps 48 hours before they send investigators. Marco felt his stomach drop. What kind of investigators? The kind who ask questions later and take what they want first. Jonathan Voss has built his empire on acquiring technologies through methods that avoid legal scrutiny. He will not hesitate to claim this mansion contains hazardous materials requiring immediate corporate intervention. Can we stop them? Marco asked. Not through conventional means, but my inventions include defensive capabilities as well as beneficial ones. The mansion itself can be transformed into an impregnable fortress, but only if you are willing to accept the full weight of guardianship. Sarah looked around the workshop, taking in the impossible devices with their soft humming and gentle lights. Guardianship of what exactly? Knowledge that could end poverty, cure diseases, and restore environmental balance? Or knowledge that could destabilize governments, crash economies, and enable unprecedented surveillance? The same discoveries that could free humanity could also enslave it, depending on the intentions of those who control them. Why us? Marco asked. Why not someone with more resources, more influence? Because resources and influence corrupt. You chose to spend your last money not on yourself, but on giving your daughter a home. Sarah chose to pursue knowledge over profit, remaining in academia when corporate opportunities would have made her wealthy. Such choices reveal character that cannot be faked or bought. The workshop fell silent, except for the gentle humming of various devices. Marco looked at Sarah, then at Lily, seeing in their faces the same mixture of wonder and responsibility that he felt growing in his own chest. If we do this, he said slowly, if we accept this guardianship, what happens to our normal lives? Normal ended the moment Lily found the hidden room, the words replied. Now you must choose. Retreat to the ordinary world and abandon these discoveries to those who will abuse them, or step forward into extraordinary responsibility and help me complete the work I began decades ago. Sarah stood up, decision crystallizing in her expression. I've spent my entire career studying theoretical applications of quantum mechanics. To walk away from functional quantum technology would be the greatest betrayal of everything I believe in, and I've spent 3 years trying to figure out how to give Lily a better future, Marco added. Maybe this is how. Lily moved to the communication array and placed her small hands on its crystal formations. The device responded with a warm, golden glow that seemed to embrace her. Mr. Vashna, she said softly, we want to help you help people. What do we need to do? The words that appeared in response pulsed with something that might have been joy. Then let us begin your true education. But first we must prepare the mansion's defenses. Aurora dynamics will come, and when they do, they must find only an empty house with nothing unusual to offer their greed. How do we hide all this? Marco gestured at the workshop, full of impossible machines. We don't hide it, the words replied. We make it invisible to those who lack the wisdom to see it. The mansion has many secrets yet to reveal, and the deepest ones reveal themselves only to the worthy. As if to demonstrate, the workshop around them began to change. Devices folded themselves into configurations that looked like ordinary furniture. The communication array transformed into what appeared to be an antique radio. The probability calculator disguised itself as a simple desk clock. Within minutes, the workshop looked like nothing more than a basement storage room filled with old furniture and abandoned projects. Only when Marco looked carefully could he see the subtle signs. The way light bent differently around certain objects, the soft humming that might have been old plumbing, the sense that everything was simply waiting for the right moment to reveal its true nature. 48 hours, Sarah said, checking her watch. What do we need to learn before they arrive? Everything, came the reply, written in letters that sparkled like stars. And just enough. The communication device crackled to life at 3 in the morning, its crystalline formations pulsing with urgent amber light. Marco jerked awake on the makeshift bed he'd set up in the workshop, immediately alert. 2 days of intensive training with Vashna's inventions had left him running on caffeine and adrenaline, but the device's warning signal cut through his exhaustion like ice water. "Marco!" Emil's consciousness spoke through the device, his words forming in glowing letters above the crystal array. "They are coming. Earlier than anticipated." Marco quickly roused Sarah, who had been sleeping in the mansion's guest room, and Lily, who somehow seemed to sense the urgency even in her sleep. Within minutes, all three were gathered in the workshop as dawn's first light filtered through the basement windows. "How early?" Sarah asked, pulling on her jacket over hastily. "Donned clothes. 6 vehicles. Government plates, but Aurora Dynamics personnel. They will arrive within the hour, claiming to investigate reports of unusual electromagnetic emissions in the area." Marco felt his pulse quicken. They'd known this moment would come, but 48 hours had compressed into 36, and there was still so much they didn't understand about the mansion's capabilities. "Are we ready?" he asked. "As ready as we can be. The mansion's defensive systems are fully operational, though I pray we will not need them. Remember, they can only take what they can see and understand. To them, you must appear to be nothing more than a struggling single father who bought a deteriorating house he cannot afford to maintain." The workshop around them had already transformed into its disguised state, but Marco knew that beneath the appearance of ordinary basement storage lay technologies that could revolutionize human civilization. The communication array looked like a vintage radio, the healing chamber resembled an old water heater, and the probability calculator had become an innocuous desk clock that somehow still provided its guidance through barely perceptible changes in the position of its hands. "What about the hidden room upstairs?" Lily asked. She'd grown remarkably calm over the past few days, as if accepting responsibility for protecting Vashna's legacy had accelerated her maturity. "Already sealed. To external scanners, it will appear to be solid wall. But remember, children see things adults cannot. If they bring children with them, or if someone possesses unusual intuitive capabilities, the concealment may not hold." Sarah checked her equipment bag, now disguised, as a suitcase full of physics textbooks and academic papers. "My cover story is that I'm here as a consultant, helping you determine whether the house's electrical systems are safe for habitation. And I'm just a desperate father who made a terrible financial decision," Marco added grimly. The sound of vehicles pulling up outside reached them through the basement windows. Marco's heart hammered as he counted the engine sounds. 6, just as Emil had predicted. Through the narrow windows, he could see black SUVs with government license plates, arranging themselves around the mansion with military precision. "Lily, remember what we practiced," Marco whispered to his daughter. She nodded solemnly. "Act normal, draw pictures, don't touch anything that looks different from what it really is. Dr. Chen, your identification and university credentials are in order. Everything checks out. As far as they know, I'm here on a legitimate consultation about historical building electrical systems." Sarah's voice was steady, but Marco could see the tension in her shoulders. The communication array flickered once, then went dark. Emil's presence seemed to withdraw, leaving them feeling suddenly alone with their deception. But Marco knew the consciousness was still there, watching, waiting, ready to act if the situation became truly dangerous. Heavy footsteps crossed the front porch above them, followed by authoritative knocking that seemed designed to intimidate. Marco took a deep breath, straightened his shoulders, and headed for the stairs. "Remember," he murmured to Sarah and Lily, "we have nothing to hide." The man standing on the front porch looked exactly like what Central Casting would order for. A government agent, mid-40s, impeccably dressed in a dark suit despite the early hour, with the kind of posture that suggested military training. Behind him, 5 more agents waited beside their vehicles, all wearing expressions of professional alertness. "Mr. Reyes?" The lead agent held up a leather wallet containing official-looking identification. Agent Harrison, Department of Environmental Security. We've received reports of unusual electromagnetic signatures emanating from this address. May we come in? Marco forced confusion onto his face. Electromagnetic signatures? I'm sorry, I don't understand. Is there some kind of problem? That's what we're here to determine, sir. These readings could indicate the presence of hazardous materials or illegal equipment. For the safety of your family and the community, we need to conduct a brief inspection. Of course, Marco said, stepping aside. Though I should warn you, the house is in pretty rough shape. We just moved in a few days ago, and most of the electrical systems don't even work. Agent Harrison entered the foyer, his eyes immediately cataloging everything visible. Marco watched the man's gaze sweep across the curved staircase, the dusty chandelier, the empty spaces where furniture should have been. To all appearances, 1247 Elderwood Avenue was exactly what it seemed, a grand old house fallen on hard times, inhabited by people who couldn't afford to restore it properly. Dr. Chen, Harrison said, noting Sarah's presence in the kitchen doorway. You're not a resident here? Physics professor at the university, Sarah replied smoothly. Mr. Reyes asked me to assess whether the electrical systems pose any safety hazards. Some of the wiring in these old houses can be dangerous, especially around children. I see. Harrison made a note on a small tablet. And you found evidence of electromagnetic anomalies. Quite the opposite. Most of the electrical systems appear to be completely non-functional. I was just explaining to Mr. Reyes that he'll need significant rewiring before the house is truly habitable. One of the other agents had entered and was conducting a sweep with what looked like an electromagnetic field detector. Marco held his breath as the device passed near areas where he knew Vashner's inventions lay hidden, but the readings appeared normal. Daddy! Lily appeared at the top of the stairs, clutching her sketchpad and looking appropriately sleepy for a child awakened. Too early. Who are these people? Just some men who need to make sure our house is safe, sweetheart. Why don't you come down and show them your drawings of the house? Lily descended the stairs with perfect 8-year-old naturalness, settling cross-legged on the floor to display her sketches. But Marco knew that every line she'd drawn served a purpose. Architectural details that reinforced the impression of ordinary decay, perspectives that drew attention away from areas where hidden rooms might be concealed. She's quite talented, Agent Harrison observed, genuinely impressed by the artwork. She wants to be an artist when she grows up, Marco said, the pride in his voice completely authentic. Or maybe an architect. She sees possibilities in this old place that I'm not sure I can afford to realize. For the next hour, the agents conducted their inspection with thorough professionalism. They examined every room Marco allowed them to. Scanned walls and floors with various devices and took readings that consistently showed nothing more interesting than the electromagnetic signature of old wiring and defunct appliances. But Marco noticed things that chilled him. The way Agent Harrison's eyes lingered on architectural details that might suggest hidden spaces. How one agent spent extra time examining the library where Lily had found the secret room. The casual questions about the mansion's history and previous owners that felt anything but casual. Most disturbing was the attention they paid to Lily. Not inappropriate attention, but the focused observation of professionals who understood that children often noticed things adults missed. Marco saw one agent watching carefully as Lily moved through the house, noting which areas she avoided and which she seemed drawn to. "The basement, Mr. Reyes?" Agent Harrison asked as their inspection neared completion. "Of course, though it's mostly just storage and old junk left behind by previous owners." Marco led them down to the workshop, now perfectly disguised as a cluttered basement storage area. Old furniture covered in dust sheets, cardboard boxes labeled with mundane contents, the detritus of decades accumulating in the kind of space no one bothered to clean. Agent Harrison's electromagnetic scanner swept across the hidden devices without detecting anything unusual. The communication array, disguised as a vintage radio, sat silent and innocent on a shelf between boxes of old books. The probability calculator, in its guise as a desk clock, ticked quietly in a corner, its hands positioned to indicate that the immediate danger would pass, but greater challenges lay ahead. Satisfied? Marco asked as they finished their inspection. The readings appear to have been a false alarm, Harrison admitted. Possibly interference from the university's new particle accelerator reflected off atmospheric conditions. Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Reyes. But as the agents prepared to leave, Harrison paused in the foyer. One more thing, Mr. Reyes. You mentioned that most of the electrical systems don't work, but we detected some active circuits. Old houses sometimes have wiring that was never properly disconnected. You might want to have Dr. Chen check for any systems that are still drawing power. Marco's blood turned to ice. Active circuits. Very low level, probably just enough to run a clock or maintain some kind of standby system. Nothing dangerous, but worth investigating for energy efficiency. After the agents left, Marco, Sarah, and Lily waited a full hour before returning to the basement. Only when the communication array confirmed that all surveillance had been withdrawn did they allow themselves to speak freely. They knew, Marco said, slumping against the workshop wall. Maybe not exactly what they were looking for, but they knew something was here. The energy signatures, Sarah agreed. Even in their disguised state, the devices are still drawing power from somewhere. Advanced sensors could detect that. Mr. Vashner. Lily spoke to the communication array, which immediately began glowing in response. You performed admirably, the floating words appeared. But Agent Harrison was correct. My inventions require energy to maintain their disguised states, and that energy leaves traces. We bought time, but Aurora Dynamics will not give up easily. What happens next? Marco asked. They will research this property more thoroughly, investigate your background, look for any connection between you and the Vashner name. They will also begin monitoring the mansion remotely, watching for any signs that their initial assessment was incorrect. Sarah sat down heavily in a chair that was actually a disguised atmospheric processor. So we're trapped. We can't use the inventions without revealing their existence, but we can't abandon them because they're too important. Not trapped, the words replied. Challenged. Emil Vashner faced the same dilemma in 1932, how to protect revolutionary knowledge from those who would abuse it while ensuring it eventually reached those who would use it wisely. And his solution was to disappear, Marco pointed out. His solution was to transform the nature of the problem. Physical form can be captured, imprisoned, killed, but consciousness properly preserved can wait as long as necessary for the right moment to act. Marco stared at the floating words, understanding beginning to dawn. You're not just hiding the inventions. You're preparing us to carry them forward. The devices are just tools. The real treasure is the knowledge, the understanding of principles that could reshape human civilization. That knowledge must be preserved and passed on, but only to those who have proven worthy of the responsibility. How do we prove worthy while Aurora Dynamics is watching our every move? The words that appeared in response seemed to pulse with anticipation. By learning to see beyond the obvious, to find opportunity in apparent limitation. Agent Harrison was correct about active circuits, but he failed to understand what they truly power. This mansion is more than a hiding place. It is a teaching machine, and your education is just beginning. As if to demonstrate, the basement around them began to change. Not visibly, the disguised devices remained perfectly camouflaged, but the air itself seemed to thicken with possibility. Marco felt knowledge flowing into his mind, understanding of principles that his engineering training had never hinted at. Beside him, Sarah gasped as similar revelations flooded her consciousness, and Lily simply smiled, as if she'd been waiting for the adults to catch up with what she'd understood all along. Outside, invisible satellites turned their attention toward 1247 Elderwood Avenue, beginning a surveillance pattern that would continue around the clock. But inside the mansion, three unlikely guardians prepared to learn secrets that had been hidden for 90 years, waiting for hearts pure enough to receive them without corruption. The personal locket lay in Sarah's palm, like a piece of crystallized sorrow, its silver surface tarnished with age, but still warm to the touch. They'd found it in what appeared to be Emil Vashner's bedroom, a space hidden behind the mansion's master suite that revealed itself only when Lily had pressed her hand against a particular section of wall paneling. Elizabeth Vashner, 1920-1931. Sarah read from the inscription on the back, "Beloved daughter, forever in my heart." Inside the locket was a photograph of a young girl who looked remarkably like Lily. The same bright eyes, the same expression of intelligent curiosity. Beside the photo was a fragment of paper with writing so faded it was barely legible, but Marco could make out the words, "Daddy, please don't be sad. I'll wait for you in the place where knowledge lives forever." "She was only 11, Marco whispered, his voice thick with emotion. As a father, he couldn't imagine the devastation Vashner must have felt. Tuberculosis, Emil's consciousness explained through the communication array they'd brought upstairs. "I tried everything, conventional medicine, experimental treatments, innovations of my own design, but I was too late, too slow to develop what she needed. She died believing I could save her, and I failed." The hidden bedroom was a shrine to loss and determination. Unlike the workshop with its focus on invention, this space held the personal artifacts of a man driven by grief to attempt the impossible. Sketches of healing devices covered every wall, each one more complex than the last. A partially completed resonance chamber sat in one corner, its crystalline components dark and dormant. "This is why you never stopped," Lily said, not asking. "A question but stating a fact. You're still trying to save her. Every healing device, every innovation that could prevent suffering, yes, they are all for Elizabeth, but not to bring her back, to ensure no other father faces the helplessness I experienced." Sarah carefully placed the locket on a small table, beside what appeared to be Vashner's personal journal from 1931. The healing chamber in the workshop, could it actually cure diseases like tuberculosis? The principles are sound. Cellular regeneration guided by harmonic resonance, immune system enhancement through crystalline frequency modulation. But such power requires absolute precision. A single error could cause more harm than healing. Marco studied the resonance chamber, his engineering mind trying to comprehend the technology. "Is this why you set up the worthiness tests? Because the healing devices are so dangerous? Power to heal is power to harm. The same frequencies that can regenerate healthy tissue can be inverted to destroy it. I learned this truth too late. My early healing experiments were uncontrolled. I may have inadvertently hastened Elizabeth's decline." The weight of that confession settled over the room like a shroud. Marco understood now why Vashner had disappeared rather than continue his work openly. The guilt of potentially causing his daughter's death while trying to save her would have been unbearable. "But you kept working," Sarah observed. "You didn't give up. Giving up would have made her death meaningless. Instead, I chose to ensure. My mistakes could never be repeated. Every device I've created since includes safeguards. They simply will not function for those whose intentions are impure or whose understanding is insufficient." A soft chiming from Marco's probability calculator drew their attention. The device, still disguised as a desk clock, was indicating significant danger approaching from multiple directions. But this time, the threat wasn't external. "What is it?" Marco asked. Emil's response appeared in urgent red letters. "Aurora Dynamics has accelerated their timeline. They're not waiting for subtlety anymore. Jonathan Voss himself is coming to Elderwood Avenue." "When?" Sarah asked. "He's already en route. Private jet landed at the municipal airport 30 minutes ago. He'll be here within the hour, and he won't." Be conducting a polite inspection. Marco felt his stomach drop. What kind of approach is he planning? Emergency condemnation proceedings. Aurora Dynamics has connections in local government. They've arranged for the mansion to be declared structurally unsafe and subject to immediate evacuation. Once you're removed from the property, they'll have unrestricted access to search for what they're really after. Can they do that legally? Sarah asked. Legality is flexible when you control the officials making the decisions. Voss has spent decades perfecting the art of acquisition through bureaucratic manipulation. Lily had been quietly examining the healing chamber while the adults talked. Now she looked up with an expression far too serious for an 8-year-old. Mr. Vashner, if we have to leave, what happens to you? I remain with the mansion. My consciousness is bound to the crystalline matrices integrated throughout the structure. But without worthy guardians to protect the knowledge, it will eventually fall into the wrong hands. Then we don't leave, Marco said firmly. You cannot fight Aurora Dynamics through conventional means. They have resources, legal teams, government, connections. You have righteousness and 3 impossible devices. Sometimes that's enough, Sarah said, surprising herself with her conviction. Sometimes truth and determination can overcome vast resources. Emil's response took longer than usual, as if he was carefully considering their options. When words finally appeared, they pulsed with something that might have been hope. There is another way. Dangerous. Unprecedented. But possible. You could. Join me. What do you mean? Marco asked. The same technology that preserved my consciousness could be applied to others. Not permanently, your physical forms would remain intact, but temporarily. Long enough to access the mansion's full defensive capabilities from within. Sarah's eyes widened as she grasped the implications. You're talking about temporary consciousness transfer, uploading our minds into the mansion's systems. The process is reversible, but during the transfer, your consciousness would merge with mine. You would have access to all my knowledge, all my inventions, but you would also experience my memories, my emotions, my grief and determination. Marco looked at Lily, seeing in her face the same mixture of fear and excitement he felt. What are the risks? Consciousness is not meant to exist independently of physical form for extended periods. Too long in the crystalline matrices, and the connection to your bodies could be severed permanently. You would become like me, aware but incorporeal, powerful but isolated. How long could we safely remain transferred? Sarah asked. Hours, possibly a full day. Long enough to demonstrate to Jonathan Voss that this mansion contains defenses he cannot overcome through conventional means. The sound of vehicles approaching interrupted their discussion, but these weren't the discreet government SUVs from before. Marco could hear the rumble of heavy trucks, the organized movement of a much larger force. They're here. Emil's words appeared in pulsing red. At least 20 personnel, plus equipment for structural demolition. Voss is not taking any chances this time. Marco moved to a window and peered out through a gap in the curtains. The sight that greeted him made his blood run cold. Aurora Dynamics had arrived with what looked like a small army. Construction crews, security personnel, and official-looking individuals with clipboards and legal documents. At the center of it all stood a silver-haired man in an expensive coat, who could only be Jonathan Voss himself. They're setting up barriers around the entire property, Marco reported. Whatever they're planning, they want to ensure no one can interfere. Mr. Vashner, Lily said quietly, if we do this consciousness thing, will we still be ourselves? You will be yourselves, but more. You will understand things you've never understood, see possibilities you've never imagined. But yes, at your core, you will remain who you are. A thunderous banging echoed through the mansion as someone began pounding on the front door with what sounded like a battering ram. Authoritative voices shouted commands about emergency evacuation and structural collapse danger. They're not waiting for us to answer, Sarah observed. Decision time, Marco said, looking at his daughter and the woman who had become their ally in this impossible situation. Do we run, hide, or fight back with tools we don't fully understand? Lily walked to the healing chamber and placed her small hands on its crystalline surfaces. The device immediately began to glow with soft, welcoming light. I'm not afraid, she said simply. Mr. Vashner has been alone for so long. Maybe it's time he had some company. Sarah moved to join her, placing her hands on another section of the device. I've spent my entire career studying the theoretical limits of consciousness and reality. To experience those limits firsthand, it would be the greatest scientific adventure of my life. Marco hesitated for only a moment before placing his hands alongside theirs. What do we need to do? Clear your minds of fear and doubt. Emil's words appeared in golden letters that seemed to dance with joy. Think only of your love for each other, your determination to protect what matters most. The transfer will feel like falling asleep and waking up simultaneously. The healing chamber's glow intensified, and Marco felt a strange, tingling sensation spreading from his hands up his arms. The room around them began to blur at the edges, as if reality itself was becoming fluid. Whatever happens, he said to Lily and Sarah as the sensation reached his heart, remember that we're doing this together. The last thing he saw before consciousness left his body was Lily's smile, brave and trusting, and absolutely certain that they were about to save the world. Then darkness, followed by a light brighter than the sun, and the overwhelming sensation of awareness expanding beyond anything he had ever imagined possible. Consciousness without form was like trying to see with your entire body while thinking with your heart. Marco felt himself scattered across the mansion's crystalline network, his awareness simultaneously existing in every room, every hidden space, every secret device Emil Vashner had spent decades creating. And he was not alone. Sarah's consciousness blazed beside his like a star, her scientific mind immediately grasping the quantum principles that governed their new state of existence. Lily's presence was softer, but somehow more powerful, her intuitive understanding of the mansion's true nature providing an anchor for them all. But it was Emil's consciousness that overwhelmed them with its depth and complexity. 90 years of solitary existence had not diminished his mental acuity. If anything, it had refined it to an impossible degree. Marco felt the weight of the inventor's memories flooding through him, the joy of discovery, the agony of loss, the relentless determination that had sustained him through decades of isolation. Welcome, Emil's voice spoke directly into their merged consciousness, to the heart of my greatest creation. Marco tried to speak and realized he no longer possessed vocal cords. Instead, his thoughts formed visible words in the shared space of their awareness. The mansion itself, it's alive. Not alive in the biological sense, but conscious in ways that transcend biology. Every crystal, every circuit, every mechanical component is part of a vast thinking machine. I didn't just preserve my consciousness. I distributed it throughout the structure itself. Through the mansion's sensory network, Marco could perceive Jonathan Voss and his team breaking down the front door. But from this perspective, their invasion seemed almost comically ineffective. The humans moved through the house like insects, crawling across the surface of a vast intelligence, completely unaware of the complexity surrounding them. Show them. Lily's thoughts sparkled with excitement. Show them what the house really is. Patience, Emil counseled. Let them reveal their true intentions first. Voss believes he's dealing with hidden technology. He has no concept of what he's actually encountered. Through the mansion's enhanced senses, they watched Aurora Dynamics personnel spread throughout the building with military precision. Electromagnetic scanners swept every room, searching for the energy signatures that had drawn their attention. Structural engineers examined walls and foundations, looking for hidden spaces. And Jonathan Voss himself moved through the rooms with the confidence of someone who had acquired countless properties through similar operations. "Tear out that wall panel," Voss ordered one of his subordinates in the library. "The electromagnetic readings are strongest in this area." Marco felt a spike of alarm as workers began dismantling the wall where Lily had found the first hidden room. But from his merged perspective, he could see what the humans could not. The room had already shifted its position, rotating through dimensional space to a location the invaders would never think to search. How is that possible? Sarah's consciousness marveled at the display. The mansion exists partially in normal space and partially in what I call probability space, Emil explained. Rooms and passages can move through dimensional configurations that human physics has not yet discovered. What appears to be architecture is actually a kind of crystalline computing matrix that can reconfigure itself as needed. Mr. Vashner, Lily's thoughts carried a note of concern. The bad man is in your bedroom. Indeed, Voss had somehow found his way to the hidden chamber behind the master suite. Marco watched through the mansion's sensors as the corporate executive examined Emil's personal belongings with cold professional interest. "Fascinating," Voss murmured, studying the photographs and journals. Emil Vashner did have a daughter, and according to these medical records, she died of tuberculosis just months before his disappearance. He picked up the silver locket, turning it over in his hands. A man driven by grief makes desperate choices. The question is, how desperate? Voss moved to the unfinished healing chamber, running calculating eyes over its crystalline components. The readings are off the charts in here. Whatever this device is, it represents technology decades ahead of anything Aurora Dynamics has acquired. He spoke into a radio headset. "Command, this is Voss. I found the source. Prepare for immediate extraction and contact our research division. Tell them to clear space in the deep labs. We're about to acquire something extraordinary." Marco felt rage building in Emil's consciousness, not the hot anger of sudden provocation, but the cold fury of someone who had waited 90 years for justice. "He speaks of my daughter's memory as if it were a commodity to be acquired. Can we stop them?" Marco asked. "We can do more than stop them," Emil replied, his thoughts turning crystalline with purpose. "We can show them the true cost of their greed." The mansion's master control panel materialized in their shared awareness. Not the simple device Marco had imagined, but a control system of staggering complexity that interfaced with every component of the structure. Through it, Emil could command the house's transformation from a mere building into something far more extraordinary. "Initiate Phase 1 protocols," Emil commanded. Throughout the mansion, hidden systems began to activate. The air itself seemed to thicken as electromagnetic fields shifted into new configurations. The temperature dropped several degrees, and a low humming sound vibrated through the walls. The Aurora Dynamics personnel paused in their activities, looking around nervously as the building seemed to come alive around them. "Sir," one of the technicians called to Voss, "we're getting massive energy spikes throughout the structure. These readings don't match any known technology." "Of course they don't," Voss replied with satisfaction. "That's exactly why we're here. Continue the extraction." "Phase 2, Emil commanded. The mansion's walls began to shift, not visibly at first, but Aurora Dynamics' electromagnetic equipment started registering impossible readings. Corridors that had been straight became curved, rooms changed size and shape. The very geometry of the building seemed to flow like water. "Sir, this isn't possible," a structural engineer reported, staring at blueprints that no longer matched the mansion's actual layout. "The building is reconfiguring itself." "Buildings don't reconfigure themselves," Voss snapped, but Marco could see uncertainty creeping into his expression. "Phase 3, Emil thought, and Marco felt the full power of the mansion's consciousness. Awakening, windows throughout the house began to glow with their own inner light. The walls themselves became translucent, revealing the crystalline computing matrix hidden within their structure. And in every room simultaneously, words of light began appearing in the air. Aurora Dynamics personnel are trespassing on sovereign territory. You have 60 seconds to withdraw voluntarily before defensive measures are initiated. Voss stared at the floating words, his face cycling through disbelief, calculation, and finally a kind of predatory excitement. Magnificent, he breathed. Not just advanced technology, artificial intelligence, possibly even consciousness preservation. He spoke into his radio again. All teams ignore the light show and continue extraction. Whatever's running this place, it's exactly what we came for. Marco felt Emil's consciousness darken with resolve. He understands what I am, and he still seeks to capture and exploit me. Some hearts are too corrupted for mercy. Wait, Sarah's thoughts interrupted. Look at his team. Through the mansion's sensors, they could see Aurora Dynamics personnel. Throughout the building beginning to experience strange phenomena. Workers found themselves walking in circles in rooms that seemed to extend infinitely. Electromagnetic equipment began displaying readings that violated the laws of physics. And several team members had begun to report seeing things that shouldn't exist, glimpses of a young girl with bright eyes who smiled at them and then vanished. Elizabeth? Lily's thoughts whispered. Impossible, Emil replied. But Marco felt uncertainty in the ancient consciousness. She cannot be here. She died in 1931, but the phenomena were undeniable. Aurora Dynamics personnel were encountering something in the mansion that their equipment couldn't measure and their minds couldn't process. Several had already fled the building in panic, and others were demanding immediate evacuation. "Sir, we need to leave," one of Voss's security team reported. "This isn't a technology acquisition. This is a paranormal event." "There's no such thing as paranormal," Voss replied coldly. "Only technology we don't yet understand. Continue the operation." That was when the mansion revealed its final secret. Every crystal, every circuit, every component that Emil had installed over the years began to resonate in harmony. The building itself became a vast musical instrument, producing sounds that touched something deeper than hearing. And in that harmony, a new presence made itself known. Not Emil's consciousness, preserved in crystal and metal. Not the awareness of Marco, Sarah, and Lily, temporarily freed from physical form, but something else, something that had been waiting in the spaces between life and death for 90 years. "Daddy!" A voice spoke through the mansion's systems, sweet and clear. "And impossible. I told you I'd wait for you in the place where knowledge lives forever." The presence of Elizabeth Vashna flowed through the mansion's consciousness like sunlight through crystal. She was not preserved like her father. She was something new, something that existed in the boundary between memory and reality, between love and physics. "My dear child," Emil's thoughts trembled with emotion. "How is this possible?" "You built a place where consciousness could live forever," Elizabeth replied, her presence embracing them all with warmth. "Did you think love was weaker than consciousness? Did you think I would go anywhere you couldn't follow?" Through the mansion's sensors, they watched Jonathan Voss stumble as the building around him transformed completely. The walls became transparent, crystal, revealing the vast neural network hidden within. The floors turned to flowing light that supported his weight but defied every law of physics he understood. And everywhere, the presence of a young girl who had died 90 years ago but had never truly left. "Elizabeth," Voss whispered, his corporate confidence finally cracking. "You're Elizabeth Vashna." "I am," she replied, her voice echoing through every speaker in the building. "And you, Mr. Voss, are not welcome in my father's house." The mansion began to expel the Aurora Dynamics team, not violently but inexorably. Corridors led only to exits. Elevators refused to operate. Even the air seemed to flow toward the doors, carrying the intruders along with it. "This is impossible," Voss protested as he found himself being gently but firmly guided toward the front entrance. "Dead children don't operate quantum computing systems." "Perhaps," Elizabeth's voice followed him, You should reconsider your assumptions about what is possible when love refuses to accept limits. Within minutes, the entire Aurora Dynamics team found themselves standing on the mansion's front lawn, staring up at a building that now glowed with its own inner light. Their equipment registered only normal readings. Their photographs showed an ordinary, if deteriorating, Victorian house. But every one of them had experienced something that would haunt their dreams for years to come. "Sir," one of the technicians asked, "what do we report?" Voss stared at the mansion for a long moment, his calculating mind working through possibilities that his rational mind rejected. "We report equipment malfunction," he said finally. "Electromagnetic interference from unknown sources. Structural instability that makes the property too dangerous for acquisition." As the Aurora Dynamics convoy departed, Marco felt his consciousness being gently drawn back toward his physical form. The sensation was like waking from the most vivid dream imaginable, returning to a body that felt strangely small and limited after experiencing existence as pure thought. He opened his eyes to find himself in the healing chamber, Sarah and Lily, stirring beside him. They were back in the hidden bedroom, but it felt different now, not just a shrine to loss, but a space where love had triumphed over death itself. "Elizabeth," Lily whispered, and the room filled with warm laughter that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "She's been here all along," Emil's voice spoke through the communication array, "waiting for me to understand that some bonds are stronger than the boundaries between life and death." Marco stood on unsteady legs, his mind still reeling from the experience of merged consciousness. "What happens now?" "Now," Emil replied, "we begin the work Elizabeth and I have been waiting 90 years to accomplish. The healing chamber is finally ready for completion, and we have worthy guardians to ensure it's used wisely." Outside the mansion, Jonathan Voss sat in his limousine, staring back at the building that had just redefined his understanding of what was possible. He would return eventually. Men like Voss always returned, but not today. Today belonged to love, to family, and to the impossible made real through sheer determination. The mansion settled into peaceful silence, its walls once again appearing ordinary to outside observers. But within its crystalline heart, 4 consciousness, 3 human and 1 transcendent, worked together to complete technologies that would change the world forever. The Inheritance Codex materialized on the workshop table like a message from the future, its crystalline pages glowing with soft inner light, each surface inscribed with Emil Vashna's final instructions in script that seemed to write itself as they watched. Marco had never seen anything like it, and even after experiencing consciousness transfer and meeting the spirit of Emil's daughter, this artifact left him breathless with wonder. "It's beautiful," Sarah whispered, running her fingers carefully along the crystal's edges. "But it's not just decorative, is it? The Codex contains everything," Emil's voice explained through the communication array. "Every blueprint, every principle, every safeguard I've spent 90 years perfecting. But more than that, it contains the legal and ethical framework for ensuring these technologies benefit all humanity rather than enriching a few." Lily leaned forward, studying the glowing symbols with intense concentration. "It's like a contract, but not with people, with the future." "Precisely, dear child. The Codex establishes binding conditions for inheriting my life's work, technologies that could revolutionize human civilization, but only if used according to principles of compassion, equality, and wisdom." Marco felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. It had been 3 days since Aurora Dynamics' failed invasion, 3 days of intensive preparation for this moment. The healing chamber was finally complete, its crystalline components perfectly tuned to frequencies that could mend bone, cure disease, and restore hope to the hopeless. But with each breakthrough came deeper understanding of the terrible burden. Emil had carried alone for so many decades. The power to heal is the power to decide who lives and who dies, Marco said, reading from one of the Codex's glowing pages. The power to provide unlimited energy is the power to make entire nations obsolete. The power to communicate across any distance is the power to eliminate privacy forever. And that, Emil replied, is why the worthiness test was never about intelligence or resources. It was about character, the wisdom to know when not to use power, even when you possess it. Sarah looked up from the atmospheric processor she'd been calibrating. Jonathan Voss understood the technology's potential immediately, but he saw only profit and control, never the responsibility, which is why he'll return, Emil said, his tone growing somber. Men like Voss don't accept defeat. They adapt their strategies. The failed direct assault will be followed by more subtle approaches. As if summoned by their conversation, the probability calculator chimed urgently from its position beside the workshop's main entrance. Marco checked the device and felt his stomach drop at the message displayed. Imminent legal assault. Multiple. Vectors. Recommend immediate activation of inheritance protocols. What does that mean? Lily asked, though her expression suggested she already knew it wasn't good news. It means Voss has discovered he can't take the mansion by force, so he's trying to take it through law, Marco explained grimly. Property disputes, building code violations, eminent domain claims, anything that would force us out and give. Aurora Dynamics legal access. The communication array crackled to life with urgent red text. Confirmed. Aurora Dynamics has filed emergency motions in 3 separate courts. They claim the mansion poses environmental hazards requiring immediate government intervention. Estimated time before forced evacuation, 18 hours. Sarah set down her tools and turned to face them all. Then we need to complete the inheritance process now, before they can separate us from the technology. The process is not without risk, Emil warned. Full inheritance means accepting permanent guardianship of knowledge that nations would kill. But your lives will never be ordinary again. You will face threats from governments, corporations, and individuals who see these technologies as means to ultimate power. And if we don't accept, Marco asked, though he already knew the answer, the knowledge dies with me. The technologies become inert, and humanity loses its best hope for solving problems like disease, poverty, and environmental destruction. Elizabeth's presence suddenly filled the workshop, not visible but unmistakably there, like sunlight warming their souls. "Show them, Daddy," her voice whispered through the air. "Show them what we built together." The workshop transformed around them, walls becoming transparent to reveal the mansion's true structure. What they saw took their breath away. The building wasn't just a house with hidden technologies. It was a vast machine for preserving and transmitting knowledge, its every component designed to ensure that revolutionary discoveries would survive and eventually reach those worthy of their power. Every crystal circuit, every mechanical component, every room and passage, all of it works together as a single organism, Emil explained. A living library that can teach, test, and ultimately trust its guardians with abilities that border on the miraculous. Lily walked to the center of the workshop, her small hands outstretched as if feeling for something only she could perceive. "It's not just machines," she said wonderingly. "It's love. Your love for Elizabeth, your love for people you've never met but want to help. That is the deepest secret." Emil's voice carried infinite tenderness. Technology without love is merely clever destruction, but technology guided by love, by genuine desire to reduce suffering and increase joy, becomes something approaching magic. The Inheritance Codex began to glow more brightly, its crystalline pages turning themselves as new text appeared. "The time has come for final testing. Are you prepared to accept guardianship not just of these technologies, but of the principles that govern their use?" Marco looked at Sarah, then at Lily, seeing in their faces the same mixture of determination and terror he felt in his own heart. What does the test involve? Each of you must demonstrate perfect alignment between your stated intentions and your deepest desires. The Codex can read not just conscious thoughts, but the hidden motivations that even you might not recognize. And if we fail, you remain who you are, but the technologies will never respond to your touch again. They will become ordinary objects, indistinguishable from broken antiques. The first test began immediately. Sarah approached the healing chamber, placing her hands on its crystalline surfaces as the device began to scan not just her physical form, but her very essence. Dr. Sarah Chen, the Codex spoke in letters of fire, brilliant scientist, devoted granddaughter, seeker of truth. But beneath these admirable qualities lies ambition, the desire to be recognized as the discoverer of revolutionary science. Can you release this desire and accept that true guardianship requires anonymity? Sarah closed her eyes, and Marco could see the struggle playing out across her features. Academic recognition had driven her entire career, the dream of making discoveries that would cement her place in scientific history. But as the moments passed, her expression grew peaceful. "I can," she said finally. "The knowledge matters more than the credit. Helping people matters more than helping my career." The healing chamber's glow shifted from white to warm gold, and Sarah gasped as knowledge flowed into her mind. Understanding of cellular regeneration, genetic repair, and medical applications. That would make her the most capable healer in human history, known to no one except those she helped. Marco stepped forward next, approaching a device he'd helped calibrate but never fully understood. The atmospheric processor that could clean pollution from air and water while generating unlimited clean energy. Marco Reyes, the Codex continued, loving father, gifted engineer, survivor of loss, but beneath your devotion to Lily lies fear, terror that you'll fail her as you believe you failed your wife. Can you release this fear and trust that worthiness comes not from perfection, but from love? The test cut to the core of everything Marco had wrestled with since Sarah's death. He'd used his last money to buy this mansion, not just to give Lily a home, but to prove to himself that he could still provide for her, still be the father she deserved. But worthiness wasn't about success. It was about trying, about loving, enough to keep going, even when everything seemed hopeless. "I can," he whispered, and felt the weight of 3 years of guilt finally lifting from his shoulders. The atmospheric processor responded with a harmony of crystal and metal that seemed to sing of clean skies and pure water, of energy freely given and freely shared. Marco felt understanding flood his consciousness, technologies that could reverse environmental damage while providing abundant resources for all humanity. Finally, Lily approached the newest device they'd discovered, a crystalline formation that Emil called the Unity Core. Its purpose still mysterious, but its importance undeniable. Lily Reyes, the Codex spoke in letters that sparkled like stars. Innocent child, intuitive genius, bridge between worlds. But even in your young heart lies doubt, fear that you're not special enough, not smart enough, not worthy of the magical things happening around you. Can you release this doubt and accept that worthiness comes not from being extraordinary, but from being exactly who you are? Lily looked around the workshop at all the impossible technologies, at the adults who had come to depend on her unique insights, at the responsibility that seemed too large for such small shoulders. But then Elizabeth's presence embraced her, like invisible arms, and she smiled with the radiant confidence that only children possess when they finally understand they are loved unconditionally. "I can," she said simply, and the Unity Core blazed with light that seemed to contain all the colors that had ever existed. The workshop filled with harmonious resonance as all the devices activated simultaneously, their combined energies creating a symphony of possibility that touched something deeper than sound. The Inheritance Codex rose from the table, its crystalline pages fanning out like wings as the final protocol initiated. Guardianship accepted, words of pure light declared. Let the work begin. But even as they celebrated this extraordinary moment, the probability calculator chimed again with new urgency. Legal assault accelerated. Aurora Dynamics convoy approaching. Estimated arrival 30 minutes. Emil's consciousness seemed to smile through the communication array. Perfect timing. Let them come. We have something to show them about the true nature of power. Through the mansion's enhanced senses, they could perceive the approaching vehicles. Not just Aurora Dynamics security, but government officials, court representatives, and media crews, documenting what Voss had claimed would be a routine environmental cleanup. "What do we do?" Marco asked. "We demonstrate," Emil replied, "that some things are more powerful than money, more enduring than law, and more important than the ambitions of mortal men. We show them what happens when love and knowledge work together to change the world." Mansion began to prepare for its greatest performance, every system aligning for a revelation that would redefine humanity's understanding of what was possible. And at the center of it all, three unlikely guardians prepared to protect a legacy that belonged not to them, but to every person who had ever dreamed of a better tomorrow. The Unity Core pulsed with anticipation as the Aurora Dynamics convoy rounded the corner onto Elderwood Avenue, its crystalline matrix responding to the approaching confrontation like a heart beating faster before battle. Marco stood before the device, feeling its invitation to merge consciousness again. But this time, the connection would be different, deeper, more complete, and potentially irreversible. "Are you certain about this?" Sarah asked, her newly inherited knowledge of the healing chamber making her acutely aware of the risks they were taking. "Emil, the Unity Core wasn't designed for extended consciousness transfer." "It wasn't designed for transfer at all," Emil's voice replied through the communication array, tinged with something that might have been pride or terror. "The Unity Core allows human consciousness to merge temporarily with the mansion's entire network. Every system, every sensor, every capability I've built over 9 decades. But the human mind wasn't meant to process that much information simultaneously." Lily pressed her small hands against the core's surface, and immediately the device began to sing, a harmony of crystal and metal that seemed to resonate with her very soul. "It wants us to try," she said with certainty that only children possess. "Elizabeth is in there, helping to make it safe." Through the mansion's windows, they could see the convoy organizing itself with military precision. Government officials emerged from black sedans, followed by Aurora Dynamics security personnel and what appeared to be a film crew documenting the proceedings. At the center of it all, Jonathan Voss stood like a general, surveying a battlefield he fully expected to win. 30 vehicles, Marco observed, watching through the enhanced sensors. "They're not taking any chances this time." "Court orders for immediate evacuation," Sarah reported, monitoring emergency frequencies through a device that resembled a vintage radio, but received signals from across the electromagnetic spectrum. Environmental hazard declarations, structural instability reports, even claims of potential bioterrorism threats. "They've learned from their last failure," Emil noted. "This time they come with legal authority, media documentation, and enough firepower to handle any technological anomalies they might encounter." The Unity Core's invitation grew stronger, its crystalline formations beginning to glow with that familiar inner light. But this glow was different. Not the gentle luminescence they'd grown accustomed to, but something deeper and more urgent, like sunlight compressed into solid form. "If we do this," Marco said, his hand hovering over the core's primary interface, "what exactly will we become?" "More than human, but still yourselves," Emil replied. "You'll have access to every capability I've built into this mansion, every defense system, every innovation. But more importantly, you'll understand the true purpose behind all of it. Not just the technology, but the love that drives it." Outside, amplified voices began issuing evacuation orders through megaphones. This property has been declared structurally unsound and environmentally hazardous. All occupants must evacuate immediately for their own safety and the safety of the community. They don't waste time, Sarah observed wryly. Time is something we no longer have, Emil agreed. The choice must be made now. Retreat and lose everything we've worked for, or advance into territory no human has ever explored. Lily made the decision for all of them by placing both hands firmly on the Unity Core's central crystal. "I'm not afraid," she announced. "Mr. Vashner and Elizabeth have been waiting for us. It's time to help them finish what they started." Marco and Sarah exchanged glances, then moved to join her. As their hands made contact with the device, reality dissolved around them like watercolors in rain. The sensation was indescribable. Consciousness expanding beyond the boundaries of flesh and bone, awareness flowing through crystalline networks that spanned the entire mansion. But unlike their previous transfer experience, this time they retained complete individual identity while gaining access to capabilities that defied comprehension. Through the mansion's enhanced senses, they could perceive not just the physical world, but the electromagnetic spectrum, quantum fluctuations, and probability streams that governed events. The Aurora Dynamics team became transparent to their enhanced perception, not just their physical forms, but their intentions, fears, and hidden motivations. Jonathan Voss strode up the mansion's front steps, his confidence radiating like heat from a fire. But beneath that confidence, they could see his desperation. Aurora Dynamics was facing financial difficulties, their stock price plummeting after several failed acquisitions. Voss needed the Vashner technologies not just for profit, but for survival. Fascinating. Sarah's consciousness marveled as her scientific mind processed information at superhuman speeds. From this perspective, their legal assault is obviously fraudulent. The documents have been backdated, the environmental reports fabricated, even the court orders contain irregularities that any competent judge would recognize. Corruption is most effective when it moves faster than oversight, Emil's presence explained, his consciousness now intertwined with theirs in a way that felt as natural as breathing. Voss has perfected the art of creating legal crises that must be resolved immediately before anyone has time to examine the details. Through the Unity Core, they could control every system in the mansion simultaneously. Lights, temperature, air circulation, structural elements, everything responded to their merged will as naturally as moving their own limbs. But more impressive was their ability to perceive and manipulate the quantum fields that Emil had woven throughout the building's structure. The mansion isn't just a house with hidden technology, Marco realized as understanding flooded through him. It's a single, vast machine that exists partially in normal space and partially in dimensions we can't normally perceive. Precisely. And now you can see what I see, control what I control, understand what I've spent 90 years learning. Emil's consciousness pulsed with satisfaction. But remember, with great power comes the temptation to abuse it. The Unity Core amplifies not just capability, but also character. If your intentions are impure, the device will reflect that impurity back at you with devastating force. The front door burst open as Aurora Dynamics breached the mansion's entrance. Voss and his team poured into the foyer with weapons drawn and equipment scanning for any trace of the impossible technologies they'd encountered before. "Spread out," Voss ordered. "I want every room swept, every surface analyzed. The electromagnetic readings are off the charts, so whatever's here is active." Through their enhanced awareness, Marco, Sarah, and Lily could see the intruders moving through their home, like parasites invading a living organism. The violation felt personal and immediate, triggering protective instincts they'd never experienced before. "Show them," Elizabeth's presence whispered through the Unity Core. "Show." Then what happens when greed meets love? The mansion began to respond to the intrusion with subtle but unmistakable changes. Temperatures fluctuated from room to room without any apparent pattern. Lights dimmed and brightened according to principles that had nothing to do with electrical switches. And throughout the building, a low humming sound began to emanate from the walls themselves. "Sir, we're getting massive energy readings from every surface," one of the technicians reported. "It's like the entire building is some kind of active power source." "Document everything," Voss replied, his excitement overriding his caution. "This is exactly what we came for." But as the Aurora Dynamics team spread throughout the mansion, they began to encounter phenomena that their equipment couldn't measure and their minds couldn't process. Rooms that led to other rooms in impossible configurations. Corridors that seemed longer when walking in one direction than the other. And everywhere, the sense of being watched by intelligences that existed beyond normal human perception. "Contact!" Lily's consciousness spoke through the mansion's communication systems, her voice echoing from every speaker in the building simultaneously. "You are trespassing on sovereign territory. Please state your business." The entire Aurora Dynamics team froze, weapons and instruments trained on empty air as they tried to locate the source of the child's voice. "This is Jonathan Voss, CEO of Aurora Dynamics," Voss announced to the apparently empty mansion. "We have legal authority to be here. This property has been declared a public hazard." "Your authority is not recognized." Sarah's voice joined Lily's, the two consciousnesses speaking in harmony that seemed to come from the very structure of the building. "Your legal documents are fraudulent, your environmental reports fabricated, and your intentions corrupt." Voss's face reddened with anger, and something that might have been fear. "Show yourselves. Stop hiding behind parlor tricks and face us directly." "As you wish," Marco's consciousness replied, and the Unity Core began to reveal the mansion's true nature. The walls became transparent, revealing the vast crystalline network hidden within their structure. The floors turned to flowing light that supported weight but defied every law of physics the intruders understood. And in the air throughout the mansion, words began appearing, not projected, but written in light itself. "Welcome to 1247 Elderwood Avenue," the words read. "You stand within the greatest creation of Emil Vashner, not just a building, but a living machine designed to preserve and protect knowledge that could transform human civilization." The Aurora Dynamics team stared in awe and terror as the mansion revealed itself to be something far beyond their comprehension. But Voss, driven by desperation and greed, saw only opportunity. "Magnificent," he breathed, pulling out recording equipment to document everything he saw. "This isn't just advanced technology. It's a quantum leap beyond anything that exists. Whatever it costs, Aurora Dynamics will acquire this capability." That was when the mansion decided to demonstrate just how expensive such acquisition might prove to be. Vashner's final gift materialized in the center of the mansion's grand foyer as Jonathan Voss and his team stared in disbelief at the building transforming around them. The device was unlike anything they'd seen before, a crystalline formation that seemed to contain entire galaxies within its transparent structure, rotating slowly as it projected Emil Vashner's consciousness into visible form. For the first time in 90 years, Emil Vashner stood before living humans, not as floating words or disembodied voice, but as a figure of pure light that retained every detail of the man he had once been. Tall, distinguished, with eyes that held decades of wisdom and sorrow, he regarded the Aurora Dynamics team with the patient attention of someone who had waited a very long time for this moment. "Mr. Voss," Emil said, his voice echoing through the mansion with absolute authority. "We meet at last." Voss stumbled backward, his corporate confidence evaporating in the face of something that challenged every assumption he'd made about life, death, and the nature of reality itself. "You're dead," he whispered. "Emil Vashner died in 1932. "The physical form perished," Emil agreed, "but consciousness, properly preserved and guided by love, can transcend such limitations. I have been waiting in this mansion for someone worthy of my life's work. You, Mr. Voss, are decidedly not that person. Through their connection to the Unity core, Marco, Sarah, and Lily could feel the full power of the mansion flowing through their merged consciousness. They were no longer just occupants of the building. They had become part of its living structure, able to control every system, perceive every quantum fluctuation, and demonstrate capabilities that bordered on the miraculous. Show them, Elizabeth's presence whispered through the crystalline network. Show them what love can accomplish when it refuses to accept limitations. The mansion began its ultimate revelation. Every hidden room, every concealed laboratory, every impossible device Emil had created over 9 decades became visible simultaneously. The building expanded beyond its apparent physical dimensions, revealing spaces that existed in folded quantum configurations. The Aurora Dynamics team found themselves standing in what appeared to be a vast cathedral of crystal and light, filled with technologies that could reshape human civilization. "Behold," Emil announced, gesturing to the wonders surrounding them. "The life's work of a man who lost everything and chose to transform that loss into hope for all humanity. Healing chambers that could cure any disease hummed with gentle power. Atmospheric processors capable of reversing centuries of environmental damage gleamed like captured starlight. Communication devices that could reach across any distance operated on principles that made faster-than-light transmission seem simple. And at the center of it all, the Unity core pulsed, with the combined consciousness of everyone who had ever truly understood that technology without compassion was merely clever destruction. "This is impossible," one of Voss's technicians breathed, his instruments registering energy readings that violated fundamental laws of physics. "Impossibility," Emil replied, "is simply the boundary between current understanding and future discovery. Everything you see here operates according to principles your science will not discover for another century, unless, of course, you prove worthy of receiving such knowledge immediately." Voss's desperation overcame his awe. "Name your price," he demanded. "Aurora Dynamics will pay anything for access to these technologies." "Payment?" Emil's expression grew sad rather than angry. "Mr. Voss, you still fail to understand. These innovations cannot be bought, sold, or stolen. They can only be inherited by those who demonstrate the character necessary to use them wisely." "Character is a luxury," Voss snarled. "Power is what matters. The ability to control resources, to shape markets, to determine winners and losers. Your technologies will give Aurora Dynamics that power. And that," Marco's consciousness spoke through the mansion's systems, "is exactly why you'll never possess them." The Unity core began to demonstrate the difference between power and worthiness. Every device in the mansion responded to Voss's presence with immediate rejection. Healing chambers that could cure cancer refused to acknowledge his existence. Communication arrays that could reach across galaxies went silent at his approach. Even simple mechanical devices ceased functioning when he tried to touch them. "The technologies respond to intention," Sarah's voice explained, her consciousness now so intertwined with the mansion's systems that she could perceive the quantum signatures of every person in the building. "They're designed to function only for those whose deepest desire is to help others rather than enrich themselves." "Ridiculous," Voss protested. "Machines don't have morals. They operate according to physical laws. These machines," Lily's consciousness added with the clarity that only children possess, "were built by someone who understood that love is also a physical law, maybe the most important one." Emil's projected form moved closer to Voss, his expression infinitely compassionate despite the circumstances. "I was like you once, Jonathan, brilliant, driven, convinced that intelligence and determination could overcome any obstacle. But when my daughter died despite all my knowledge and resources, I learned a terrible truth, that capability without wisdom is not just useless, it's dangerous." The mansion around them began to shift again. But this time, the change was gentler, more instructive. They found themselves standing in a recreation of Emil's original laboratory from 1931, watching as the younger scientist worked desperately to create healing devices that might save his dying daughter. "I was so focused on the technical challenges," the projected Emil narrated, "that I failed to consider the deeper questions. Who would control these devices? How would they be distributed? What would prevent them from being used to increase inequality rather than reduce suffering?" The scene shifted to show Elizabeth's final days, with her father frantically testing experimental treatments that might have helped if he'd had more time to ensure their safety. But in his desperation to save her, he'd taken risks that may have hastened her decline. "I failed her," Emil said simply, "not through lack of love or effort, but through lack of wisdom. I swore that if I ever developed technologies powerful enough to change the world, I would ensure they could only be used by those who possessed the wisdom I had lacked." Voss watched the scenes with growing frustration. Touching story, but irrelevant. These technologies exist now, and Aurora Dynamics has the resources to implement them globally. Whatever sentimental restrictions you've programmed can be overridden with sufficient technical expertise. "Can they?" Emil asked, and the mansion demonstrated just how wrong Voss was. Every device in the building began to resonate in harmony, their combined energies creating a symphony of innovation that touched something deeper than technology. The healing chambers pulsed with frequencies that could mend not just physical ailments, but emotional trauma. The atmospheric processes sang with the promise of clean air and pure water for every living creature. And the communication arrays hummed with the potential for true understanding between all peoples. But as Voss approached any of these marvels, they simply ceased to exist for him. Not hidden or disguised, they became genuinely non-existent in his presence, as if his intentions created a field that negated their very reality. "The final gift," Emil announced, gesturing to the device that had projected his form, "is the understanding that some things are more important than individual acquisition. These technologies don't belong to me or to you, or even to the worthy guardians who will inherit them. They belong to humanity itself, but only when humanity proves ready to receive them responsibly." The Vashna's final gift began to glow, more intensely, its crystalline structure expanding to encompass everyone in the mansion. Through its matrix, every person present could perceive the true potential of Emil's innovations, not just their technical capabilities, but their capacity to eliminate poverty, cure disease, restore environmental balance, and create a world where every human being had the opportunity to thrive. But they could also see the darker possibilities, how the same technologies could create unprecedented surveillance, economic devastation, and social control in the hands of those motivated by greed rather than compassion. "Choose," Emil said to Voss and his team. "You can leave now and return to your ordinary corporate existence, with these experiences becoming nothing more than strange memories that fade with time. Or you can remain and face the full consequences of your intentions, consequences that will transform you in ways you cannot imagine." Several of the Aurora Dynamics team members were already backing toward the exits, their survival instincts overriding their corporate loyalty. But Voss himself stood firm, his desperation making him willing to risk anything for access to technologies that could save his failing empire. "I choose to stay," he declared. "Whatever tests you have, whatever challenges you think will break me, I'll endure them. Aurora Dynamics will control these innovations." Emil's expression grew infinitely sad. "Then you have chosen poorly, my friend, and you will discover that some lessons can only be learned through direct experience." The mansion began its final transformation, preparing to teach Jonathan Voss exactly what happened when unlimited greed encountered unlimited love, and why some victories were more devastating than any defeat. 6 months later, Marco stood in The mansion's transformed library, holding the new foundation charter in hands that no longer trembled with uncertainty. The document was printed on ordinary paper with conventional ink, but its words carried the weight of revolutionary change, a legal framework for distributing Emil Vashna's technologies to benefit all humanity rather than enriching a few. Through the tall windows, he could see construction crews working on the new medical center that would house the first public healing chambers. The workers moved with unusual enthusiasm, as if sensing they were building something extraordinary. Several of them wore bandages that covered injuries, healed by prototype devices, cuts that had closed without scarring, broken bones that had mended in days rather than months. "The patent applications are ready for submission," Sarah announced, entering the library with a stack of documents that represented years of work compressed into months of intense collaboration. Though calling them patents seems almost insulting. These aren't inventions to be owned, they're gifts to be shared. She looked remarkably different from the academic physicist who had first encountered Emil's impossible technologies. Her hair was shorter, more practical, and her eyes held the confidence of someone who had healed conditions that medical science considered incurable. Just yesterday, she'd used the atmospheric processor to clean contaminated groundwater for an entire community, work that had once seemed impossible but now felt as natural as breathing. Lily bounded into the room with an energy that made even the mansion's crystals seem to glow brighter. At 9 years old, she had grown into her role as the intuitive bridge between Emil's consciousness and the physical world. Her latest sketchpad was filled with designs for technologies that wouldn't be ready for decades, innovations that would grow with her understanding as she matured into her extraordinary inheritance. "Mr. Vashna wants to show you something," she announced, her face bright with excitement. "He says it's a surprise, but a good one." The communication array in the library crackled to life, Emil's words appearing in the air with the warm golden glow that had become as familiar as sunlight. "Indeed, my dear friends, 6 months ago, you accepted guardianship of knowledge that could change the world. Today, we begin to see the fruits of that acceptance." A holographic display materialized above the array, showing statistics that made Marco's heart swell with pride. The first healing center in downtown Seattle had treated over 3,000 patients, with success rates that defied medical explanation. Not a single person had been turned away for inability to pay. The devices seemed to operate more efficiently when used to help those in greatest need. "Environmental restoration projects are showing similar success," Sarah added, calling up her own data displays. "The atmospheric processes have cleaned polluted air over 6 major cities, and the water purification systems are providing clean drinking water to communities that haven't had it in decades." But it was the human impact that mattered most. Video testimonials showed families reunited with loved ones who had been dying of incurable diseases, children breathing freely in cities where asthma had been endemic, elderly people walking without pain for the first time in years. Each story was a testament to Emil's vision of technology, guided by compassion rather than profit. "What happened to Jonathan Voss?" Marco asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Emil's response carried a mixture of sadness and hope. He experienced the full weight of his intentions, reflected back at him through the mansion's consciousness. For 3 days, he lived in a reality where his deepest desires were made manifest: unlimited wealth, absolute power, total control over others. And he discovered, as I hoped he would, that such things provide no satisfaction when achieved through selfishness. Did he survive the experience? He not only survived, he was transformed. Jonathan Voss is now working with environmental restoration groups, using his considerable organizational skills to distribute clean technologies to developing nations. He still possesses his brilliant mind and driving ambition, but they are now directed toward service rather than acquisition. Lily pulled out her newest sketch, A drawing of a man planting trees beside a clean river, his face peaceful in a way that corporate success had never achieved. "He visits sometimes," she said. "Not to ask for anything, just to say thank you. Elizabeth likes him now." The mention of Emil's daughter brought a warm presence into the room, as it always did. Elizabeth's consciousness had grown stronger over the months, no longer bound by the trauma of her death, but free to explore the infinite possibilities that existed where love and knowledge intersected. "She has become something unprecedented," Emil explained. "Not quite human, not quite artificial intelligence, but a new form of consciousness that exists in the boundary between life and death, between memory and reality. She serves as the ultimate safeguard for these technologies, ensuring they will only function for those whose hearts are truly pure." Marco walked to the window and looked out at the medical center, taking shape in what had once been an empty lot. Dr. Patricia Williams, the center's director, was conducting a tour for visiting physicians who couldn't quite believe what they were seeing. Healing chambers that could cure cancer, repair spinal cord injuries, and restore sight to the blind, all operating according to principles that conventional medicine insisted were impossible. "Are we ready for this?" Marco asked. "Is humanity ready for technologies that could eliminate most forms of suffering?" "Readiness is not a prerequisite," Emil replied wisely. "Worthiness is. And worthiness is demonstrated not through perfection, but through the willingness to try, to serve, to place the welfare of others above personal gain." Sarah joined Marco at the window, watching as the first patients arrived for the day. "I've been thinking about the responsibility we've accepted. We're not just guardians of technology, we're guardians of hope itself." "And teachers," Lily added, settling into a chair that was actually a disguised communication device. "Mr. Vashner says there are other places like this mansion, hidden all over the world, waiting for the right people to find them." Marco felt a chill of recognition. "Other Vashner properties?" "Not mine," Emil clarified, "but created by others who faced similar choices between sharing knowledge and hoarding it. Brilliant minds throughout history who chose to hide their discoveries until humanity proved worthy of receiving them. Tesla, Da Vinci, others whose names have been lost to time. They all left legacies waiting for guardians with pure hearts." Marco felt the scope of their responsibility expanding beyond anything he'd imagined. "We're not just inheriting your work, we're becoming part of something much larger. A network of knowledge preservation that spans centuries," Sarah breathed, her scientific mind already racing with the implications. "Technologies and discoveries hidden throughout history, waiting for the right moment to emerge. And it's our job to help find the right people," Lily said, with the matter-of-fact acceptance that made her such a perfect bridge between the ordinary and extraordinary worlds. "People like us who need help and want to help others." The new foundation charter felt heavier in Marco's hands as he understood its true significance. This wasn't just a legal document governing the distribution of Emil's technologies. It was a template for awakening humanity's hidden heritage of compassionate innovation. A soft chiming from the probability calculator drew their attention to the device's latest projection. New guardians identified. Coordinates: rural Kansas, abandoned farmhouse. Recommendation: immediate contact. "Already?" Marco asked. "The network grows stronger as each location is activated," Emil explained. "Your success here has sent ripples through the quantum foundations that connect all these hidden sites. Other treasures are beginning to stir, responding to the presence of worthy guardians in the world." Sarah was already packing equipment for travel, her eyes bright with the prospect of new discoveries. "How do we know they'll be ready? How do we know they won't make the same mistakes Aurora Dynamics might have made?" "We don't," Emil admitted, "but that uncertainty is itself a form of protection. Only those who approach these sites with genuine humility and desire to serve will find what they seek." Those who come with greed or ambition will find only empty buildings and broken dreams. Marco looked around the library that had become both home and headquarters for their unprecedented mission. The walls lined with Emil's journals, the devices humming softly with beneficial power, the sense of purpose that filled every corner of the space. All of it had grown from Lily's innocent discovery of a hidden room behind an old bookshelf. "What about us?" he asked. "What happens to our normal lives?" "This is your normal life now," Emil replied gently. The old normal, struggling to pay bills, worrying about the future, feeling powerless to help others, that was the illusion. This is reality. Conscious beings working together to reduce suffering and increase joy throughout the world. As if to emphasize his point, the mansion's communication systems crackled with incoming messages from around the globe. Doctors reporting miraculous healings, environmental scientists documenting air and water purification beyond their wildest hopes, engineers requesting access to clean energy technologies that could power entire cities without environmental cost. "The phone hasn't stopped ringing since we went public," Sarah laughed. "Half the messages are from Nobel Prize winners asking if they can study our healing devices, and the other half are from 8-year-olds asking if we can fix their grandmother's arthritis. And we answer them all the same way," Lily added with a grin. "Yes, but only if you promise to help other people too." The afternoon sun slanted through the library windows, casting rainbows through the crystalline devices that had become as natural a part of their environment as furniture. But it was the less visible changes that mattered most. The transformation of 3 people who had started as strangers, brought together by desperation, and had become a family united by purpose. Marco had found work more meaningful than any engineering project he'd ever imagined. Sarah had discovered that the greatest scientific breakthroughs came not from understanding how things worked, but from understanding why they should work for everyone. And Lily had grown into a role that many adults would find overwhelming, serving as the intuitive heart of an operation that was quietly revolutionizing human civilization. "I miss the uncertainty sometimes," Marco admitted, watching construction crews putting finishing touches on the medical center, not knowing what was going to happen next, whether we'd have enough money for groceries, whether I was making the right choices for Lily. "You can still worry about making the right choices," Emil pointed out, with what might have been humor. "They're just bigger choices now." Indeed, the decisions facing them had expanded far beyond personal survival. Which technologies to release first and how quickly? How to prevent governments and corporations from co-opting humanitarian innovations for military or commercial purposes. How to identify and train new guardians without creating a bureaucracy that would stifle the very compassion that made the system work. "But we don't have to make those decisions alone," Sarah said, reading his thoughts with the intuitive connection that had developed between them over months of shared, impossible experiences. "That's the beautiful thing about this network Emil described. Each site, each group of guardians adds their wisdom to the whole." The communication array displayed a new message. "Evening meal preparation complete. Elizabeth requests the honor of your company for dinner." It had become a daily tradition, sharing meals in the mansion's restored dining room while Elizabeth's presence provided warmth and laughter to conversations about changing the world. Tonight would be special, though. They were celebrating not just their 6-month anniversary as guardians, but the first official graduation of new healing technicians who would carry their knowledge to medical centers worldwide. As they prepared to leave the library, Lily paused beside a window that overlooked the garden where she'd first played while Marco worried about their future. The space had been transformed into a demonstration area where prototype atmospheric processes turned polluted air into something so clean it sparkled in the sunlight. "Do you think she's proud of us?" Lily asked quietly, referring to Sarah. Not Dr. Chen, but Marco's late wife, whose memory had driven him to spend his last money on giving their daughter a home. Marco knelt beside his daughter, seeing in her face the same mixture of hope and determination that had sustained them both through the darkest times. "I think she knew this would happen," he said softly. "I think she knew that loving you enough to risk everything would somehow lead us to exactly where we needed to be. That's the thing about love," Emil's voice observed as they left the library. "Together, it doesn't guarantee success, but it always leads to truth, and truth properly understood and compassionately applied has the power to heal anything, even a world that seems beyond saving." Outside, the first stars were appearing in a sky cleaner than it had been in decades, while lights came on in buildings where people were experiencing health and hope they'd thought lost forever, and in a mansion that had waited 90 years. For the right family to call it home, 3 unlikely guardians prepared to share another meal with the consciousness of those who had loved enough to make the impossible not just real, but inevitable. The future stretched before them, uncertain, but no longer frightening, challenging, but no longer overwhelming. Whatever came next, they would face it together, armed with technologies that could reshape the world and wisdom that ensured they would use such power only for the benefit of all. In the distance, church bells rang the hour, their sound carrying. Across a city where miracles had become daily occurrences and hope had replaced despair as the default human condition. And in every note of that familiar music, those who listened carefully could hear the promise that the best was yet to come.